your support in purchasing the book and providing that opportunity to get this information out. I publish newsletter now on the website for nearly 20 years, and we seek to provide cutting-edge news and information, but it's not really put together in consolidated form, and that's what this book hopes to do. I really published my last book, the major book, The No Grain Diet, over 10 years ago. So this is an update to that. And there's been a lot of important information in those 10 years, and if you've been following the newsletter, you'll certainly know that. And the book seeks to tie in the information in an easy to follow way, because very few people have enough time, effort, and energy and resources to go in and look at the newsletter and consolidate it all. So that's the primary reason why this book was written. And if you find it useful, I would encourage you to put your comments on Amazon. We've got a lot of people who disagree with my positions, and there's going to be some people who don't read the book and post negative reviews on it. So if you can help balance that out, that would be greatly appreciated. And I am very honored tonight to have Dr. David Perlmutter, who is joining us and actually wrote the foreword to the book. If you've got the book, you'll know that, or if you don't, I think it came out on Tuesday, so if you've got Amazon Prime, there's a good chance that you got it today and you'll know that. Or if you got the Kindle edition, you'll certainly know that too. So he's been a good friend, great friend, and really guiding me through the process of some of the additional things that I'm going to do. The primary one would be the PBS presentations that actually starts tomorrow. I'm flying out to Atlanta to start a 2-week tour that should go over 100 stations across the country, and you probably will see me on your local PBS affiliate with an hour presentation with it's actually a total of an hour and a half, but David has done this before and helped walk me through that process, and I'm really grateful for him, because this is a message that really needs to be shared. So let me turn it over to David, and he can say a few words.
Well, thanks, Joe, and let me again express the fact that I'm certainly honored to be participating in this evening. I find it a great honor to work with Dr. Mercola. He has done an incredible service for us all in terms of really raising public awareness that we have great control over our health destiny. And that really kind of flies in the face of what we are led to believe. We are led to believe really that we should just live our lives come what may, and then suddenly when we're having problems, whether with brain problems or diabetes or you name it, why there's going to be some sort of magic fix available for us. That's not reality. And the reality of the situation is that we can be empowered by having great information, and Effortless Healing is a valuable resource to keep you on track, and beyond keeping you on track, actually allow recovery, allow you to regain your health. By and large, we are meant to be healthy, and I think when you get back to giving your body what it needs from a variety of perspectives, and I think we're going to be discussing that this evening, health is the answer. Health is what manifests. Health is what comes out. It's not that hard, as Dr. Mercola has said. It's effortless, hence the title. So I'm really looking forward to it. I've had a chance to actually look through many of the questions, and they're very compelling. I think it's going to make for some really exciting discussions this evening.
Well, thank you. And then you may want to say a few words too, that you've written. You're in the process of your second book is being launched relatively soon, and we're going to do an interview about that. But you've read the first book was a massive New York Times bestseller, The Grain Brain, and it really goes into much more detail than I do on my book for that specific topic, and it's certainly the neurological component. So it's a really a marvelous companion and highly complementary to the material I've written. So I think both books are great. And why don't you mention a few words about the Grain Brain and the new book, which is
sure. Well, the new book is called Brain Maker, and I have a great trailer on YouTube. It's called Brain Maker Trailer. Oddly enough, who knew? And the exciting thing about Brain Maker, when I wrote Grain Brain, it was all about indicating that, for example, carbohydrates were not the best food for us, and we should eat more fat. Who knew? And how incredible it is that just last week a governmental advisory committee, a dietary advisory committee, came out and said, gee whiz, we should be stopping the carbs and sugar and welcome fat back to the table. And as a matter of fact, the week earlier, as the report leaked out, they said that there's actually no health risk in eating foods that are laden with cholesterol. I mean, we were all told years and years ago, probably long before many of the viewers were around, that cholesterol was somehow a bad food to eat, that if you ate it, your arteries would get clogged and your children would be born naked and all kinds of horrible things would happen. You know, the reality is humans have been consuming a higher fat, high fiber, lower carbohydrate diet for as long as we've been here, and that has allowed us to get to doing this Google Hangout this evening. That's what has paved the way for humans to survive. Suddenly, a couple of decades ago, our food became scientized and we were given these doctrines that have no basis in reality in terms of what we should be eating. When we were put on these low-fat diets, we, by default, began eating the grains and the carbohydrates, and look at what's happened to our health. In the past couple of decades, diabetes rates have gone up threefold. I mean, it's really very, very sad that people fell into that and bought into that information. So that was really the underpinning of Grain Brain, and it's really very heartening that that information is now being validated yet again. You know, when you write a book, as you well know, it's memorialized. And unlike being virtual and in real time like we are in this discussion, you know, once you've written a book and that ink has been printed, boy, you're committed and you're hoping it's going to stand the test of time. Well, Grain Brain did in 27 countries. The new book, Brain Maker, takes us to a new level, and I'm so excited about this book. It's covering a topic that you've already been deeply involved in, and that is the role of the microbiome, the role of our gut bacteria in determining our destiny, in determining our health destiny. And really the key issue, the focus of Brain Maker is the destiny of the brain is related to the 100 trillion bacteria that live within the gut. I mean, that is a compelling notion for us to have a discussion about the wonder of these bugs, when for years we were taught to fear bugs, that they were lurking around every corner and that they were the cause of everything bad. Well, it turns out that we desperately depend on our healthy microbiome, a healthy array, a display of good bacteria in our intestines to maintain immune system, to reduce inflammation, to create brain chemistry, neurotransmitters, to create various vitamins. So it's a very, very exciting time, and that's what Brain Maker is all about. So if the participants would like to look at the trailer, again, it's on YouTube, and that is Brain Maker trailer, and I think they'll get a kick out of it.
Terrific, and we have some exciting updates about the microbiome and that some information you might not even be aware of because it's pretty new, and we're going to share that in a few moments. But I just wanted to respond to some of your comments and standing the test of time, and Grain Brain has been out for 1.5 years, and you're right, that is a challenge of writing a book because you can't change it, which is a frustration. One of the reasons why I was reluctant to write my first book, and took about 5 or 6 years before I made that commitment. But my first book, No Grain Diet, it seems to stand the test of time. It's been 11 years now, and really there's not many things that have changed. But I was encouraged to see that report that came out recently with the government's position on cholesterol, saying it wasn't dangerous. But I want to really revise it a bit, because cholesterol and fat are fine, but it's important that they are unrefined, unprocessed. Once you start heating that fat, it turns into something that's probably even more dangerous than sugar. So you have to stay away from those fried processed fats. They're really dangerous. Oxidized cholesterol is highly damaging. It should not be consumed. So just because it says it's cholesterol doesn't mean now it's okay to eat it. You've got to have raw cholesterol. So that's the key.
I'm going to agree with you, and I think that people misread that information, and they say, well, high fat, I'll just pour on the corn oil. And I think you've really got to be selective. I tell my patients that when we're talking about fat, there are good fats and bad fats. It's like doing a study where we're going to measure what is the health risks of consuming alcohol and not differentiate between Jack Daniels and a Merlot. So it really has to be put into perspective. And most of the fat that is consumed here in America is devastating. high in pro-inflammatory omega-6, and beyond that, importantly, genetically modified.
Hmm.
So we've really got to pay specific attention to hear, this report that says, as a matter of fact, you can consume meat. It's back on the table quite literally, but let's be real clear that this is meat that is grass-fed, high in anti-inflammatory omega-3s, has never been given a genetically modified food that was likely sprayed with glyphosate. So you're right. It's super important that people understand that this goes well beyond the idea of fat versus carbohydrate.
Yes, indeed. And interestingly, I did a recent interview with Stephen Drucker, who is the attorney who sued the FDA for their 1992 ruling that essentially allowed GMOs to be perpetuated upon this planet because they classified them as generally recognized as safe, which gives them a substantially equivalent status. And it's fascinating interview. But turns out most of the blame for this has to really, we would think it'd be for the biotech companies like Monsanto and Dow, but it actually goes back far before that, which is the molecular biologist who really conspire to have their opinion be prevalent and really guide the federal regulatory responses, which is really surprising. It was new information to me. So his book is a phenomenal read, one of the best books I've read in a while, and it will be out next month.
Well, I had the opportunity just this past weekend to lecture with Jeffrey Smith, Genetic Roulette, and just a man who's really full of wisdom and absolutely passionate about what's going on our planet with reference to genetic modification of our foods. And for your viewers this evening, I mean, you and I are both here in Florida, and it's interesting that we're just about ready to see approval. In fact, I think it has been approved now for the release of trillions, I guess, or billions of genetically modified mosquitoes. And so that might be, you might think, gee, that's a great thing. What could be a health risk for that? Well, anything that enters the food chain that's genetically modified is a risk. And it's not just apples that aren't going to brown. Even the mosquitoes represent a tinkering with, it's what is called genetic roulette. Yes, we don't eat mosquitoes, but dragonflies do, and fish eat them, and we eat fish. So it works its way eventually up the food chain. Chief Seattle said that man did not weave the web of life. He's only a strand in it. And it's important to recognize we're part of this whole biome, and it is the genie out of the bottle. It's very scary information.
Yes, indeed. So that's one of my passions, and as you probably know, the profits from the sale of this book are all being donated to the Health Liberty charities that we support, and one of them is of course the genetically modified movement to label GMOs, which we hope is the most effective strategy to eliminate them from the United States and the rest of the world. So I think we should start to, I was really excited about interacting with everyone, especially in this new format, so I really want to dive into the questions because it's going to help emphasize some of the and highlight some of the important concepts in the book. But before I do that, I want to reiterate what John had mentioned earlier at the beginning for these questions, which you'll see on the right side of your screen. We have about 20 or 30 questions to go over with already because we have lots of people submitted questions, but you can certainly add yours. Excuse me, the only recommendation we make is that you limit your questions to widely applicable questions. So if you have a specific long and detailed history, it's going to be, it really is inappropriate to go in there because this time doesn't allow us the opportunity to dialogue with you about your medical history to give you a good answer. And sometimes no answer is better than any answer if you don't have the complete history. So unless it has and there were a few that I picked that actually did go into specifics, but they had such a widespread component and that I thought it was worth going over. But so limit your questions from that perspective. And again, I want to emphasize, and I'll mention it again too, is that when you read the book and you have formed a conclusion on what your value of the book is, if you be kind enough to, whatever that opinion is, if you'd be kind enough to post it on Amazon, I think it would be greatly appreciated as part of your support. So with that, I think we can open up for questions, and Dr. Perlmutter is going to be reading them.
Oh, I'm reading them? Yes. Okay, fair enough. All right, here we go. And I can use the name, Lori H.?
Sure, yeah, I definitely use the name. So actually, John, you're still on, aren't you? I'm sure he is, but he'll pipe in. If
Yep,
we
I'm still here.
So if there's an opportunity, if when Dr. Perlmutter announces the person's name, if they're on, is there a way for that person to actually be videoed in or no?
It might take a while to find them. I think it's probably best if we just answer the question.
Okay.
I can look down the list and maybe try to find some people who are on.
Okay, good. If you could do that, that'd be great. Because I mean, ideally, the technical advance of this format, I was really impressed because we could actually have the person asking a question on the screen dialoguing with us in real time, which I thought was, so it wouldn't be just reading a question, it would actually be dialoguing with them, which I found fascinating. So,
I'm thinking maybe John could answer the questions. I mean, could read the questions.
no, well, you think so? John, I'm open for suggestions, but I thought it might be better if you did, but...
Okay, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
Are we all set?
Sure.
Okay, from Lori H. Is intermittent fasting interrupted by taking meds and vitamins? In other words, I think the question is, if you're fasting, does the fact that you're taking vitamins and medications, is that considered breaking your fast? And I think maybe let's just answer that question and then have a discussion, if we can, about the purpose of fasting and why it's a valuable health tool.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, and I'm trying to look at the questions. There's actually a number of them that were very similar, and one of the most important advances since the publication of my last book was the understanding of the importance and the value of intermittent fasting as a tool. From my perspective, I've known, thanks to Dr. Ron Rosedale, over 20 years ago, that insulin and leptin resistance, the inability of your cell to respond properly to those hormones, powerful hormones, is one of the most important contributors to health, to disease. So the key is to resolve that resistance. So the question becomes, how do you do it? And there really was the most powerful intervention I've ever seen clinically is intermittent fasting. And essentially, it's a process that I describe really well in the book, but that replicates our ancestral practices, because our ancestors never had access to a grocery store 24/7. And what we do is we restrict our calorie intake to about an 8-hour window or so, somewhere in that range. And there's a whole variety of different ways I've written about on the site that one can do that. So they're actually. Actually, I'm gonna answer this, and you could probably comment. I'm gonna look there because there was a few other components of this, and I don't have that. Christine, you should be on the call too. If you could email me that document I sent you yesterday, because I compiled them and I don't have that up. I just have the newer one, so that would be good. And then I could actually read the names of the individuals who did that, because who submitted those questions, and then there were some other points in there. But the answer to this question is that yes, as long as there's no calories, you can consume it. So that means you consume unlimited water, unlimited coffee and tea, really, as long as there's no sugar or cream in there. So your supplements shouldn't be an issue. I mean, yes, there are some small amount of calories if you're taking an oil supplement like krill oil or something, but it's essentially insignificant, especially if it's a fat, because fat doesn't change the insulin response. So I would strongly recommend it if you have a disease, a chronic degenerative disease, that you seriously consider this until you get your insulin resistance under control. And you can know that by having your doctor run a fasting insulin level, and it should be under 3. Now, if you're underweight or if you're under a lot of stress, adrenal stress, then you have to be somewhat careful, because intermittent fasting will tend to cause you to lose weight, which for most people is a good thing, but there are certainly a number of people who can't afford to lose weight. So you have to be really careful with that. And you may not be insulin resistant, it's something else, but that's a powerful tool. So Dr. Perlmutter, you could give your comments on that.
Well, sure. I mean, actually, in Grain Brain, we built in a whole explanation about fasting and why it's important. And I think that what Dr. Mercola mentioned is, the fact that we have always been required to fast because of the lack of availability of foods. As hunter-gatherers, there was times of food abundance and times of food scarcity. So we have a wonderful adaptability to use body fat and certainly early on use stored sugar in the form of glycogen. But Dr. Mark Mattson at the National Institute of Aging has done so much of the work on fasting and caloric restriction, and he has described fasting and caloric restriction as representing a state of what's called hormesis. And what hormesis means is a mild stress that is actually a positive thing. So what we find happening when we fast, we actually change our genetic expression. Fasting is what we call an epigenetic phenomenon. You're changing your life code's expression. That's pretty exciting. And you are upregulating. You're turning on your body's own production of antioxidants, for example. You're reducing inflammation. And, you know, from my perspective as a neurologist, fasting helps to amplify the production of a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that sounds like a big term, but what it means is growth hormone for the brain. So, you know, fasting has been around a long time. It allows, in my opinion, the brain to work better. It starts to tap into fat, and you know, it's really been a part of every major religious doctrine over the years. Whether it's the fast of Ramadan, the fast of Yom Kippur, or Jesus fasting for 40 days prior to his public ministry, it is a way to reconnect. And I think it's very, very important. And really, also as a disclaimer, I think that in moving forward with our discussion of fasting and everything we're talking about tonight, these are certainly discussions that you would want to have with your treating physician.
Terrific. All right, why don't we go on to the next question? And let me just see if I could find that. Oh, no, here I found it. Okay, good. Yeah, good. So let me just, because there was a few other questions on this. April Pinger also asked a question about this. Similarly, I have a hard time skipping breakfast since I work out at 5:30 a.m. I have no problem skipping dinner. Is this acceptable? Yes, April, it is. You know, I've been trying to popularize the component that, you know, to combat the common myth that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and for most people it isn't. But it depends upon you. All you need to do is have that window, that 8-hour window where you're not eating. So if it's a dinner, for most people breakfast works out best. But if it works out best for you to skip dinner, then by all means it'll work. So ideally, you know, if you do the breakfast thing 3 hours before you go to bed, you don't eat, and then try to skip eating until afternoon. And then Lori House, no, actually we entered the same thing.
May I go back to April as well for just a moment?
Sure.
And I would also say that, you know, I'm asked this question quite a bit. There's a wonderful article that I posted today on Facebook, and on my blog site, but on Facebook, David Perlmutter, MD, that was a link to an article that appeared in the New York Times about this whole notion about endurance athletes, for example, needing to have plenty of carbs and the idea of carb loading. And here you are, if you miss breakfast and you're in your short stack and your maple syrup and orange juice, you're not going to be able to hit the gym and exercise. What needs to happen here is you need to shift your physiology. You need to shift your physiology to be able to tap in to that vast resource of calories called fat. And you do that over time by restricting your carbohydrates and eating more dietary fat. Your body will do what's called keto adapt. You will adapt your physiology to be burning fat. You don't need to have breakfast. You can hit the gym and not have that carb load, which I say at the end of the day, actually early in the morning, you're going to crash from anyway. As you train your body to move through the idea of using fat, you don't need to have breakfast. And another thing that Dr. Mercola alludes to is the idea of 3 meals a day. Now, where was that? Who dreamed that one up? I mean, where is it written that we have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I mean, it has become a societal norm, but there's really no human physiological reason that we have to eat 3 times a day.
Yes, indeed. And, you know, I work out a lot, and I just can give a little further feedback on that. You can work out a little harder if you're eating something, but you can put, because you have glycogen in your muscle, so you can push more weight, you can do a little harder workout, and you get some benefit. But there are other benefits to training in a fasting mode, because you're really more in a repair process than a build process. So that's a good component. And if you're still struggling with disease, you know, that's not going to be a big issue. You really have to get rid of that insulin resistance first. So if you're going to be a competitive athlete, most likely you don't have insulin resistance, so it's not an issue for you. But I just wanted to mention that another person, Martha MCK, not sure how to say that, has been, her question was, I've been doing intermittent, it really kind of reinforces your answer, which is I've been doing intermittent fasting, skipping breakfast, and only eating between 12:30 and 8 for almost a year. I've not really lost any weight, but I haven't gained any weight either. When I talk with others about this, I'm told by some that I'm not losing weight because my body goes into starvation mode or slower metabolism and will hold on to the fat. And I also do interval training, exercises, yoga, and some light weight training. My question is, what would you say to those who think you have to eat within a half hour of waking to start your furnace to lose those extra pounds? And that really is, you can certainly respond to this next, but from my view, it's dated thinking. You know, especially unless you're not insulin resistant and you're a competitive athlete, because there's two specific goals. But if you're like the majority of the population, you struggle with insulin resistance, then this is a bunch of horse manure. It really is. It's not going. It's just not going to work. So you've got to ignore that. And and the one of the problems that, especially if you're Martha, obviously is a woman, so the challenge for losing weight is many women have problems with thyroid. It's pervasive, largely as related to exposure to bromine and brominated flours and fluoride. These other halogens that the toxic ones that displace iodine from the thyroid. So that's got to be looked at by a doctor who understands how to do that. So I'll hand it over to you.
No, I'm good. I'm ready to keep moving.
Okay. All right. So I think that was all the ones we had on intermittent fasting. So we can go to the next one.
Oh, I'm reading it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Cueing me. Here we go.
Well, I was only reading that because they're not in the queue on the right.
You got it. Marlene L. asked, what type of water do you drink daily? How do I know if my home water is the healthiest for me?
Oh, this is the highlight of the show, folks. New announcements here coming. I'm so excited. Dr. Perlmutter explained earlier that one of the challenges of writing a book is that it's set in stone. You cannot change it. So I wrote this book a year ago, and there's new information that's been out since it's been written. It will definitely be, it's not even on the website yet because it's so darn new. I just learned about this within the last week or two. And it answers a lot of questions. So let me answer. There's two other people who, you read this from Marlene, and there was also Bruce, who wrote, Bruce Keniege, K-N-I-E-G-G-E, does drinking alkaline water have any health benefits over other waters? And the answer to this is partially related to that. So first of all, you want to drink clean water, free of toxins. So most municipal tap waters, of course, have fluoride and chlorine in there, and the chlorine combines with organics in the water, and it converts to disinfection byproducts, which are thousands of times more toxic than chlorine, which is why you want to be careful of how you shower, too. If you're showering hot water for a long time, you're going to absorb these. They definitely are absorbed through your skin. So you've got to be really careful with that. It's not only the water you drink, because you can absorb more fluoride and disinfection byproducts from showering than you can from drinking. Just remember that. So getting back to the water. So clean water, filter it. Ideally, if you have a well, it's even better. Then you don't necessarily have to filter it. But if you don't, like most of us have municipal water, then get a filter. I have a whole house water filter, and that works pretty well. So that's my basic one. Typically, is a whole house water filter. Then I do some other processing to it, and this is where it gets really interesting, because many years ago I wrote extensive articles about that not necessarily dangerous, but kind of warning people about the myths of alkaline water. There were many multi-level marketing companies that were selling them, and they were purported to be good. And I really couldn't find any hard science and to back that up. But it turns out that the alkaline water, well, the ionizers, not necessarily alkaline water, but the ionizers that produce alkaline water do produce healthy water, but not because of the pH. The pH has almost nothing to do with the water. It's just like I wrote about a few years ago. It's hogwash. It really is. But there is a benefit, because when these alkalinizers create the alkaline water, they actually create something called hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas. This is the new insights that I've just learned about. So this hydrogen gas may be one of the most potent antioxidants that we have. And why? Why is that? Well, because hydrogen is one of the most abundant, probably the most abundant element in the universe. absolutely most abundant element. And it's the simplest element. It's got a molecular value of 1. And when it combines with another atom of hydrogen, it forms something called diatomic hydrogen, or hydrogen gas, because it is a gas. And this relates back to what Dr. Perlmutter was mentioning earlier, and really the topic of his new book, The Brain Maker, which is the microbiome. Well, guess what that microbiome produces? And may be one of the reasons why it's so important. The microbiome, a healthy microbiome, will produce between 10 and 15 liters of hydrogen gas every day. That's about 2 gallons, if you're not familiar with the metric system. So it's this hydrogen gas that has profound effects upon your body. Why? Well, hydrogen as a gas is completely neutral. It has no electrical charge, unlike a lot of the antioxidants. If you understand this oxidative theory of aging, is this oxidative stress that's unbalanced and unaccounted for that really accelerates aging and causes a lot of damages. It damages your DNA, your cellular membranes and receptors, and causes loads of problems. So we want to neutralize it in some effective way, and hydrogen gas can do that. And it's because it's so small, it penetrates every membrane in your body, your brain barrier, your mitochondrial membranes, your cellular membranes. It goes in there and it neutralizes this oxidative stress very effectively. And what does it turn to? It turns to hydrogen gas dissociates to a hydrogen ion, and it combines with the hydroxyl free radical, which is one of the most potent oxidative stressors in the body. Combine a hydrogen and hydroxyl radical, what do you get? Water. Totally neutral. So it's a powerful, effective tool. And it helps increase your other antioxidants like glutathione, superoxide dismutase. It's important for cellular metabolism. It's an anti-inflammatory, anti-obesity. And we've just begun to understand this. It's just incredible. Another cool thing is that there is no toxicity from hydrogen gas, just none. Absolutely no toxicity. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that you can get is simply by following the principles that we write about in our books. Having a clean, healthy diet, you improve the gut microbiome, which produces hydrogen gas. But you can also take it therapeutically, and there's a lot of interesting studies being published now with the benefits of hydrogen gas. Interestingly, it was recently approved as GRAS, generally recognized as safe by the FDA, but they also said that for GMOs. But it's true for hydrogen gas. It's very safe. But the reason, that's probably the reason why these water ionizers work. But let me tell you a little trick here, is that these ionizers produce hydrogen gas for about the first month when they're brand new, and then they gradually wean off. After about a month, they stop producing hydrogen gas. Why? Because the ionization process involves the buildup of collection of minerals that form scale on these plates, and that scaling eventually neutralizes the ability to create the hydrogen gas. So you can take the machine apart and clean it, which is tedious and takes hours, and you have to use chemicals, and it's just not an easy thing that people are going to be doing. But there are some new technologies, some machines that will actually change reverse the electrical current, so it descales it every time it's used, and they don't lose their ability to produce hydrogen gas. So and there's actually a company now that makes a test kit that can actually show you if the water that you're producing from the ionizers is actually making hydrogen gas, which is a really interesting component. So that is really one of the most exciting things, and that's the water I've been drinking every day for a year. Although I just recently understood within the last 2 weeks that the reason I'm doing it is because of the hydrogen gas. I was doing it for other reasons, because mostly of the structure of the water, and we've done some experiments in our lab. And I also advocate sunflower seed sprouts as a really powerful, nutrient-dense food that you can grow easily and inexpensively in your own home. And I've been having sunflower sprouts for 2-3 years now. And so we use this as a biological model to see to test these different different types of water. So we used tap water, vortex water, which actually structures the water, and then this hydrogen gas water. and it was amazing. There's a certain baseline that you get from tap water, and then a mass improvement with vortex water, and an even more massive improvement when you use hydrogen water. Because guess what? Plants love hydrogen too. All biological life utilizes hydrogen. It's part of the system. The whole universe has hydrogen in it. We need it, and if we don't have access to it, there's health complications that are occurring. But the studies on this are literally years old. This was not known last century. This is newer than vitamin D. This is the breaking news information that we're going to be sharing on the site probably in another few months or so, because we're still in the process of gathering information. But this format allows me to share it readily now, almost as soon as I found out about it, which is what I love. So I'm interested in your feedback, Dr. Perlmutter, because it may be either questions you have others might have.
Well, I would say you offered up the short answer to the question already. And I think it's certainly an evolving question. I mean, but I will say that it's really important that we draw attention to the water that we're drinking, because no one seems to understand that how very fundamental that is, and somehow feel that there's alchemy that happens when you go someplace and you drink coffee. Well, that's made from municipal water. I mean, there's something magic that happens at, you name it, coffee shop. So I think that it's very important. We at home continue to use a reverse osmosis system, and I find that to be, I have a lot of confidence in it.
Mm-hmm. It'll actually get the fluoride out too. And we have actually used that for our entire system is RO. So let's move on. There was a great question here. I love this question. Lori W. asked, when it moved away, there was a great question. What is the best way to get my traditional doctor to accept that so much of what she has been taught is wrong? Me, a layperson, and her many years of school and experience probably won't play well. I think that's a terrific question. You want to start with that? Because I'll follow up. Sure. Yeah, that's really is a good question, because ultimately it boils back to what has been my model for a long time, and encouraging people to do is take control of your health. You are hiring your physician as your coach, your consultant. He's your consultant. He or she is your consultant. And if they're not willing to work with you, that's fine. That is their choice. They can do whatever they want. They could demand that you get vaccinated or leave the practice. They're free to do that, just as you are free to leave, and that's the high recommendation. You are going to have virtually, in my experience, little to no effect, unless you have a personal relationship with an individual, of sharing your concerns. The vast majority of medical professionals are medically arrogant. They're just arrogant in general. I mean, not all of them, but there's a tendency towards that. And they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to be open because they're busy. They went to 4 years of med school, 4 years of residency, and they know better than you. So you're not in a winning battle, and they're busy. So I would just try to find someone who's already aligned with your way of thinking. What's the best way to do that? I'd normally recommend going to the health food stores in your community. Go to multiple health food stores. Ask the owners. Ask the people who work there. Get a consensus. It may take you a few hours to travel around and get it, but then you'll come up with a few people who really get it and understand it in your community. It's the old form of social networking. So that's, you got to find someone who's aligned with your way of thinking. You're not going to change them. I mean, occasionally that can happen, but that's really uncommon. And I could think of the way that my position on vaccines were changed by a patient, because I thought that if you oppose vaccines, you were definitely a quack and you should have your license removed, up until like the early 90s, and was vaccinating kids. I was a family physician, so I would do it all the time. I vaccinated thousands of children, and I absolutely regret it at this point. But I didn't know any better. But it was because a patient was kind enough to share her concerns with me, and I trusted her, and we had a relationship. But that's going to be an unusual situation, and most physicians are not going to be open to that. That's my experience.
And I would, certainly echo that. As a neurologist in my field, pretty much what neurologists tend to do is diagnose and then adios. In other words, we've named your illness, and now hope for the best. And I would indicate, most of my learning over the years has happened because patients have given me information about things, or have had responses to things that we've tried, and it's been, an epiphany. This idea of talking to your doctor and he or she isn't interested or too busy, that's only, I think, going to get worse with time, as doctors come under more stress to see more patients in fewer amounts of time. So generally people tend to be down on what they're not up on, and I would indicate that doctors don't have the time to really broaden their horizons and look at alternatives and look at lifestyle factors, for example. You can't really write prescriptions for lifestyle issues and get people out of your office in 15 minutes. That paradigm doesn't work. Jeffrey Avorn from Harvard indicates that about 70 to 80% of the information that doctors get from reading medical journals actually comes from the advertisements. So we see this very profound influence of the pharmaceutical industry in terms of the actual practice of medicine. The representatives of pharmaceutical companies come to the office, they bring the pencils and the pads and whatever else you might need, and leave a sample or two of a special drug, and that's what we are led to believe will be the answer for treating illness. God forbid we would ever try to actually prevent the illness in the first place, and that gets back to Effortless Healing, gets back to your new book about changing our approach and taking control, becoming empowered, and that's where modification of our lifestyle factors has huge traction to keep you out of the doctor's office. So, the question I think is very good, and it's very frustrating for a lot of people who see things in a different way. And sometimes you have to give up in trying to convince people because that's how they practice medicine, and you just might need to move on.
I couldn't agree more. And it's sad because I don't know what they taught you when you went to school or where you went to school, but what they drilled into us that who's your best teacher?
Patients. That wasn't what we told us in medical school, of course.
I'm sorry?
Well, I've learned it's patients, but that's not what we learned in medical school.
Oh, it's not. They actually taught us that in school.
Yeah, but we should pay attention to that.
But I just think most physicians just abandoned it or just never learned it.
All right. What can be done to combat hypothyroidism or high antibodies, perhaps Hashimoto's, and get off of Synthroid?
That's a good question, but I'd like to skip it because there's some that are more general.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know how that got up.
May I comment on that real briefly then, because I think it's important. Hashimoto's, this is an autoimmune condition, and if I may just very briefly take us back to the microbiome and understand that recognizing self versus non-self, the cornerstone of an autoimmune condition like type 1 diabetes or Hashimoto's or lupus or multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis is predicated on a healthy gut bacteria maintaining gut integrity. That when the gut becomes leaky, we send out signals to our immune system to amp their activity. They go around looking for things to attack. Sometimes it's the thyroid, very common in women. So again, the new revelation here is that this is all gut-related activity. So we can move on.
Okay, and what I'd like to add to that, as long as we're going to address it, is that because it's an autoimmune disease, what's absolutely essential for an autoimmune disease is to make sure that you have your vitamin D level optimized, because they go hand in hand. Yes, you have to optimize the gut microbiome, there's no question, but you have to optimize vitamin D because that is a central critical role for autoimmune disease. And it's consistent with the MS, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, so that's got to be addressed. There's just no way around it. And what I'm noticing, Dr. Perlmutter, is that these questions have become sorted out. They're not the ones that I want to address first. So I might have to read some of these. Let's see. Let me read the ones, and then we can go back to these, because there's a few that didn't come up. MB Lash asks, could you please address chronic fatigue as a standalone problem? There are many conditions that have this symptom or cause it as well as prescription side effects. I read an article that the International IOM, International, I forget, something of medicine. Institute of Medicine, yes, will be addressing diagnosis and taking this more seriously for those who suffer for this, and that it will be called SEID, or Systemic Exertion Intolerance Disease. Daily health tips, advice could help millions of people. Dr. Mercola, I'm very grateful and thank you for your work and your award-winning website. Thank you. So what I want to address in this, obviously this is an example of a question that we'd have to dialogue and ask her lots of questions ago, but I just want to use it as a platform to mention that let me find here that there's where did I do it? Oh, here it is. That the first step when you have any chronic degenerative disease like chronic fatigue syndrome, or people wrote in about this, Helicobacter, Lyme, Candida, stage 4 cancer, chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases like lupus and MS. All of these diseases and many more, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, you've got to get to nutrition down first. That's the core. That's the first step. The effortless healing plan. You got to control your insulin resistance. You've got to sleep well. You got to get your vitamin D. The right drink water is your primary beverage. So these are the things you have to do first. Once you got those under control, then you find a clinician based on the recommendations I gave earlier, that can help serve as your coach who's got some experience in this, because you're going to need fine-tuning. So that is the key. Chronic fatigue, there's so many things that in all these other conditions, there's so many different components that need to be addressed. Your hormones are probably a big issue and other things, but you've got to do those things first, because once you do those things, everything tends to self-normalize. So your first step is to do the basics.
And I would agree, indicating that Dr. Mercola mentioned a lot of roads lead to Rome, and that is many disease states lead ultimately to failure of energy production, which is predicated on the function of those little particles within each cell called the mitochondria. Now you can damage your mitochondria by having an unbalanced gut microbiome, by being exposed to environmental toxins, by having higher levels of sugar in your body that bind to protein and cause what are called AGEs, by having hormone imbalance. The final common pathway of all these issues is mitochondrial dysfunction. So now you're seeing physicians kind of laboring over, or at least governmental agencies laboring over, what do we call this? Do we call it chronic fatigue syndrome? They decided they were going to create a new acronym for it so that validates it. And I'll give you another example, something called fibromyalgia. Well, we've been treating fibromyalgia for, I guess, 25 years, knowing full well that there are people, more often women than men, who have generalized soft tissue pain, who are generally fatigued, and may even have some cognitive issues. And we've been calling it fibromyalgia. Well, no one accepted the name fibromyalgia, and in fact, mainstream medicine kind of indicated that there was no such thing as fibromyalgia until, lo and behold, a pharmaceutical company was able to get approval for their drug, I'm not going to mention the name, that is approved to treat fibromyalgia. Now, on the evening news, you see, now this is a way to treat your fibromyalgia. And it shows, first it talks about how wonderful the drug is, and then you'll notice when they go to all the terrible side effects, they have these great visuals. So you're watching this lady run around and with her grandchildren and having a great day, while they're telling you that, if you have a vowel in your name, you shouldn't take this drug because it's going to cause something terrible. So it's interesting how the names, the diseases become validated only when there is a drug treatment. That's a bit cynical, but hey, here we go.
I think that's pretty accurate. I just finished reading Cheryl Atkinson, who's a former CBS investigative reporter, one of the best, and was for 20 years. But she quit CBS because in her new book, she goes into all the details. It's called Stonewalled, and I'm actually going to interview her next month. And she describes this progressively increasing control of the media. It is not a free media, and this is from an absolute insider. She describes it in great detail. So I'm really looking forward to that, because what you said is true. I mean, you're only that media is controlled. They are not telling the truth, and we've got documentation of that. So you've got to get your information from other sources. So let me continue. There's 3 more questions, then we can go back to the Q&A list. These are for people who previously wrote in. Heather McLean wrote, "How can I support my digestive process since my gallbladder was removed?" Great question. As a family physician, I would see this all the time. So the first step for those of you who have gallbladder problems, don't get your gallbladder removed unless your life depends on it, because there's so many other strategies. You've got to clean up the dysfunction. Removing your gallbladder never treats the cause. Now, if your gallbladder progresses to the point where you have an acute condition and you might die from it, acute cholecystitis, then you have no choice. You've got to get it removed. But if you have it removed, and for Heather and all the others who have, it's important to understand that your gallbladder is an important support in your digestive system. What does it do? It stores bile. What does bile do? Bile emulsifies fat. So every time you have a food with fat, which is probably most of your meals, ideally you're going to want to take something like a digestive enzyme that has lipase, so that you can help digest your fat. And that's something that's not going to change unless you get a gallbladder transplant. And the last time I checked, most surgeons are not doing gallbladder transplants. So I don't know if you have any follow-up comments on that.
No, I mean, I think that one of the things that we see here in our clinic with individuals having their gallbladder out is they don't absorb fat appropriately, based on the mechanism that you just described. So, as such, first we like to look at digestive enzymes to add to their regimen, but these are the people who have even lower levels of vitamin D, lower levels of vitamin K, and have other fat-related issues, itchy skin, dry skin, cognitive issues from not absorbing fat. And I think it's very important for people to understand that we want to absorb a lot of our fat. People are thinking of being on of approaching ideas that help them lose fat in the stool. There was even a drug that was popular several years ago that blocked fat absorption.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the
Take it
world
off the
would
verse.
you ever want to block your fat absorption? I remember one of the side effects was that you would end up soiling your pants because all the fat that would come out. That was listed, but the point is, you desperately want to absorb fat. Your body's desperate for fat. We've been eating fat for millions of years, not to mention absorbing the ability to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. So, an idea of fat-related enzymes, very important.
Yes, indeed. So I've got a question here for you from Boreal Leon, who says, and it might be her, I don't know what Boreal is for real. In his inflammation approach of disease, Dr. Perlmutter states that like the root cause is the degeneration of the brain is the oxidative stress causing inflammatory responses. But many of the nutrient-dense foods that are supposedly good for the brain, like coconut oil, eggs, fish, butter, and animal fats, are generators of inflammation responses from the body. How do you harmonize these two contradictory effects?
Oh, they're not contradictory at all. As a matter of fact, foods like coconut oil, very high in saturated fat, are anything but generators of inflammation and oxidative stress. More importantly, let's get back to fats for a moment, and specifically coconut oil. We have to look at fats in terms of their susceptibility for becoming oxidized as the targets of oxidative stress. And when you have an oil like coconut oil that's more than 90% saturated fat, what we know is then it's not really even available to be oxidized in the first place. It was very interesting that the Annals of Internal Medicine in April of this year published an incredible report looking at studies encompassing more than 500,000 individuals, showing that those who consumed the highest levels of saturated fat had no increased risk for coronary artery disease. I mean, remember all those years when we were told don't eat saturated fat because, again, horrible things will happen. So these foods, as a matter of fact, don't increase inflammation, nor do they increase oxidative stress, unless, of course, an individual were to have an allergy to a particular food, in which case, obviously, inflammation is going to be increased. Now, I think it's also important to recognize that, yes, it's good to consume foods and nutritional supplements that provide antioxidant coverage, but understand fully that our bodies are making antioxidants day in and day out. So we have this wonderful backup system, or probably the primary system if it were, that reduces inflammation, that reduces free radical mediated stress by increasing antioxidant production within our bodies and even detoxification. One such system is called the NRF2 pathway. And the NRF2 pathway increases antioxidant production, is activated by such things as aerobic exercise, coffee, broccoli, things like resveratrol, green tea extract, etc. So there are wonderful influences in nature that allow us to harvest this beautiful idea that we can change our genetic expression and therefore protect ourselves against the damaging effects of free radicals and inflammation.
Yes, indeed. So I think it's just confusion about interpretation of the literature, the science, probably from the media misperception. So, and the other thing you can do, of course, is upregulate your microbiome, because that's going to produce, at least as I believe there's strong supporting evidence for, hydrogen gas. So, which is a really potent antioxidant, or you can drink supplemental hydrogen gas.
I have iced tea.
You should have hydrogen gas iced
Yeah,
tea.
I'd be doing better if I had the hydrogen gas.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. But if you're, probably if you're healthy already, it may provide limited benefit, if at all. Because if you're already making 2 gallons a day of this, then you may not need it. If you're not making hardly any, then you've got a huge problem. So that's just a simple way to up-regulate it. But the final question before I'll let you go on to the ones that are appearing on the right is from Gretchen Thompson. And she writes, any help for ongoing sciatica? Presently doing proteolytic enzymes, some exercise, and due for physical therapy soon. Thanks for addressing this issue. So this is what this is actually one of the other points that relates to not being able to update the book prior to publication, because that's just the nature of publishing. So in the book, in the book I wrote, well, before I get into that, sciatica is a common problem. 80% of the population struggle with it. It's just massive, and I'm sure you see quite a bit in your practice. Because if you have debilitating back pain, although you may not specialize in that, so you may refer them out, I don't know. But 80% of people have it, and of course, I believe one of the most common reasons, certainly what was the cause for me, was a structural issue compounded by less than ideal lifestyle choices. And I was really healthy. I'd exercised almost my entire adult life, pretty much my entire adult life, not almost, my entire adult life I've been exercising. Never really have taken any time off from exercising. So I was in really good physical shape, flexible, doing stretches, had seen chiropractors, dozens of chiropractors, done inversions tables, a whole variety of different specific exercises for the back, and I still struggle with this back pain. Then I realized, and I did posture exercises, try to do these, then I started realizing that excessive sitting was a problem. So I said, okay, I'll start standing up every 10 minutes. And I had set a timer and stand up every 10 minutes. But back pain didn't budge. Because overall, I was sitting probably at least 10 hours, and at some points probably 12, 16 hours a day, sitting down. It just devastated me, and I had severe back pain. And just the tangent of this is an important principle I want to highlight, is to always listen to your body, because if you're doing something that's violating natural principles, your body has no other way to communicate you than through something like pain. So pain can be such an important, valuable tool as a feedback mechanism. So don't really just be angry that you have the pain and wish that you didn't, and take aggressive measures to eliminate or to cover it up or mask it with anti-inflammatories or pain pills. You really need to seek to get to the cause of it. And you can imagine conditions like leprosy, which is essentially a disease which attacks the nerve cells so that you don't feel any pain. And these people actually die prematurely because they have no feedback mechanism on that. So it's a really useful tool. So the feedback and the message I got, unfortunately it took me well over a decade before I understood this, was just largely as a result of a lot of the 10,000 studies that are published that shows that excessive sitting is dangerous for you. Now that's in the book. That's definitely in the book. But since I published the book, I interviewed Dr. James Levine, who is a researcher at Mayo Clinic, and he convinced me of the importance of standing more. In fact, when I interviewed him, he stood up the whole time, which like I'm doing now. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try it. So I stopped sitting down, and now I sit down less than 30 minutes a day. And my back pain disappeared. The only time I have back pain is when I travel. So I just recently traveled last week, and I had sat down for like 6 hours. There was no easy way to avoid it. And of course I had the back pain, but it was minor, and it only lasted for a few moments, and then it just disappeared as soon as I started standing up again. So that's the key thing that's not in the book, because in the book I actually kind of discourage the use of stand-up desks, but I think that's the way to go, is just to stand up as much as you can. Because if you're standing in one place all the time, like at a cash register, or you're forced to stand, then it may not be as good, because you really do need to change position. But if you're at a stand-up desk, you can move around, you're moving, because your body was designed to move. It was never designed to sit down for 16 hours a day. So, I couldn't encourage you more. I think here's the key. I read this study recently that showed that if the average person in the United States was to sit less than 3 hours a day, the life expectancy of the U.S. would go up by 3 years. That's a powerful statement. Just moving, because you change all your metabolism. You decrease your risk for diabetes, insulin resistance, everything once you're standing up. It's just an amazing, simple, free thing to do. So maybe you can comment on that. And then, of course, see chiropractors. You know, I mean, I'm a big fan of chiropractic because, you know, address some of the structural things, but you got to address the cause first. Otherwise, you're just playing games.
Well, I would agree with everything you've said, and I would further add that, you know, the name sciatica, I think, is really very, very much overused. I mean, I see patients with back pain here in my office where I'm doing this talk from right now every day. And sciatica is actually a very specific issue related to compromise either of the sciatic nerve itself or its components, L3, 4, 5, and S1, the nerve roots that go into the sciatic nerve. And this is really a situation where there are both motor and sensory issues, pain down the leg, sometimes a foot drop. Obviously, on the exam, we might see something like a dropped reflex. And that, as a cause of low back pain, is exceedingly rare. People come in, they say, my back hurts, I've got sciatica, or complain of pain in the buttock, and they say they have sciatica, and they really don't. Most of these pains that we see are soft tissue related, muscles, tendons, and ligament. And by and large, almost across the board, it's because the back has become deconditioned. And what's the number one cause of deconditioning of a back? Sitting your butt in a chair all day. You know, that's what people do. So, you know, traditionally we either squatted or we stood or walked. And, you know, the most beneficial things that I have found for patients with chronic back pain, and like you say, you know, traveling can certainly exacerbate that problem. I've suffered that myself, and it can be incapacitating, is really low back extension work, strengthening work, and mobilization work. I wrote an article 25 years ago indicating, just summarizing a study that indicated that, in fact, chiropractors are actually very effective in treating low back pain. My medical colleagues jumped all over me. How could you say that? I said, the reason I said it is, number one, it's true, and number two, this was a published report in a peer-reviewed journal that I had summarized. So we've got a lot to learn, but I think, again, the broad strokes here are getting back to what environmental issues, lifestyle issues we were designed or we have adapted to over time, and sitting at a chair in front of your monitor all day is certainly not one of them.
Yeah, and I learned by practical experience, trying it for 3 to 6 months, that standing up every 10 to 15 minutes, and most people aren't willing to do that, just probably willing to stand up once or 2, 3 times an hour at most, it didn't work for me. And I would not just stand up, I would stand up and stretch. I'd do all these flexibility movements, and it's just sitting down was the key. So I suspect that that's a massive element for most people. And again, emphasizing the principle, listen to your body. If anything I say or Dr. Perlmutter says that you attempt to implement into your lifestyle regimen and it causes problems, well, then that's a clue. You've got to honor what your body's saying. Find a health coach, a consultant, a really good physician to guide you through the process, because something's wrong. You know, your body knows best.
Yeah, it's not like low back pain is an indication of hydrocodone deficiency. So that's, you know, unfortunately how it's treated. So it doesn't address the problem.
No. So I've finished the ones on my sheet that I thought that I wanted to get. I was hoping that we'd actually have these individuals on, but as I said, you know, the technology didn't seem to allow it too easily. So, but why don't we go through a few others?
All right. Let's just see. What would you like?
Let's see. Well, let's go with the Karen W.
Karen W. asked, I have eaten a lot of leafy greens over the years, but now have some concern over the blood clotting properties. Oh, I love this. Of vitamin K. How much can I eat without causing a problem? Oh, that's a great question. You want to go first?
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, we'll say that there are 2 types of vitamin K, vitamin K1 and vitamin K2. And interestingly, they both influence your blood clotting. I didn't realize this until I interviewed Dr. Sturgis from the Netherlands, who's a really world-class expert in this. But traditionally, it's only taught that vitamin K1 is an influence, because that's the typical one. But vitamin K2 does also, so they both do. Now, vitamin K2 is not in the green leafy vegetables. That's vitamin K1, which we all need. We need them both. They work synergistically, have different functions. K1 is primarily for the blood clotting. K2 is almost as important, if not as important, as vitamin D. It does almost all the same things. In addition, it takes the calcium out of the lining of your blood vessels, the calcification, that plaque, and it puts it back into your bones. So it builds stronger bones and it decreases arterial calcification. That's the simple summary. Now, this is not an issue for you. Now, Karen, the only reason I'm assuming you're asking this is because you are taking a blood thinner. Blood thinners are not good things. They can cause lots of problems. The main one is osteoporosis. But sometimes you don't have a choice. It's the lesser of two evils. If you have a blood clot or a medical device like a valve or I'm sure there's a dozen other indications.
Atrial fibrillation.
Atrial fibrillation. So these are things that you have to be on, because otherwise you can die if you throw a clot and you're dead. Now, there are really sophisticated regimens that you got to be really careful with, that you can go off of and really be done in only the guidance of a professional who really understands this. You don't want to do this yourself, because it's a life-threatening situation. You've got to be careful. But anyway, if you're on these blood thinners, you can still take these. There's no question you can take vitamin K1 and K2. You just have to work with your doctor to readjust what's called the PT level, the prothrombin level, so that you're adequately anticoagulated and you're not going to have that consequence.
And I would agree 100%, and that you should find a level of consuming those dark green leafy vegetables that you're comfortable with, and let the doctor who's adjusting, if in fact you're taking warfarin or Coumadin, let them adjust your dosage to fit your food your regimen, and look at the INR. Generally they're going to want to keep that INR between 3 and 4, so they may have to tweak your Coumadin or warfarin up or down. But a lot of times my patients who are even on Coumadin, I'll put them on K2, and then I get a phone call or an email from a doctor saying, why would you put that patient on K2? Because they're on Coumadin. And whereas it does affect blood clotting, it's only minimally, and there are some very important upsides. Dr. Mercola mentioned bone density, also cancer implications as well. So K2 is really important to have on board. We use it very, very aggressively, and there's really not going to be much of an effect of K2 on the INR, in other words, on the adjustment of that medication.
Yeah, and also you could take it as a supplement, which is kind of pricey. K2 is an expensive supplement, but you can get it for free in fermented foods, and we have developed and designed a specific supplement called Kinetic Culture. It's not a supplement, it's actually a starter culture that you can ferment your own vegetables, and you can create K2 for free, because there are specific strains that do this. Because most fermented vegetables won't, but you can get the highest form of K2 is in natto, which is a slimy, stinky Japanese fermented soybeans, and if you can tolerate that, that's great. It's probably the ideal way, because it's milligram quantities, and you'll need a few hundred micrograms. So that is another way to do it. But if you really want convenience, you could take the supplement, but I think ideally it's best to get it from foods. So as a follow-up to that, why don't you review Martha G's question, who has one of the conditions that would cause a person to be an anticoagulant.
At age 70, I was prescribed diltiazem, 120 milligrams for atrial fibrillation, which the doctor says I need to be on for life. Can atrial fib be conquered? Can I restore the upper chambers of my heart? I have reduced sugar and grains for the past 6 weeks. What else can I do?
Well, that's a good start. Sugar and grains are definitely a great start. You want to consider maybe intermittent fasting, the high-quality fats, getting out the processed food, improving your water, getting your sleep. And then here, in the case of any cardiac arrhythmia, I think the important component is one of the most pervasive mineral deficiencies is magnesium.
Absolutely. So
you've got to make sure you're on a really high-quality, good dose of magnesium. Magnesium is very safe. Carolyn Dean wrote a really great book about it, and it has its own protective feedback, so that if you take too much, if you overdose on magnesium, you get loose stools. Your body causes it to excrete. It's an osmotic diarrhea, and you just excrete it out. So it's really hard to overdose on it, but it's a magnificent thing, and your heart needs magnesium to balance out that rhythm, and most people are magnesium deficient and can contribute to that. It's a big issue. So there's a few other things you can do, but without getting into specifics, I'm sure you might have some other general comments.
Well, let me just make a comment about the magnesium. So then you go to your doctor and say, I heard Dr. Mercola, and he said I might be magnesium deficient. That might cause a cardiac irregularity. And then the doctor checks your magnesium level, and lo and behold, it's normal. So understand that your serum magnesium level is pretty worthless because magnesium does its job within the cell. So you have to ask your doctor to perform what's called an erythrocyte, or a red blood cell magnesium level. That measures the concentration within the red blood cell, which really sort of reflects or emulates what you might expect to find within the heart muscle cells themselves. And a lot of times, actually, the serum magnesium level might be high, or in the higher range of normal, whereas the intracellular level may be really, really low. Now, I'm not going to tell everybody that has AFib that if they get their magnesium levels corrected, their AFib is going to go away. But I will say it's an experience we've had on multiple occasions. We jumpstart our patients by giving them magnesium intravenously, and then keep them going on various forms of magnesium. Depending on what magnesium is bound to or chelated to, does affect how much diarrhea you're going to get. So magnesium citrate is actually...
Unless you do it intravenously.
Right, intravenously bypasses that. So there are guidelines that you should discuss with your doctor, another disclaimer. But, for example, magnesium citrate is notorious for causing loose stools. Matter of fact, we use it as a prep for our patients who are going to have a colonoscopy. We give them a couple bottles of mag citrate. But there are other forms. One of the newest kids on the block in terms of magnesium parenthetically is something called magnesium threonate, which we've now discovered has a very unique ability to get into brain cells and amplify brain cell function, amplify the actual function of what are called the mitochondria, the energy produces within the brain cells. So, we can do a whole hour on magnesium. It's a pretty important and oftentimes overlooked mineral.
Yes, indeed. So, and that's the beautiful thing about having the two of us together, because we complement each other so well. And I wouldn't have thought to say that, but it's good. And actually, Carolyn Dean, in her book on magnesium, I forget the title of it, but it's easy to find. She has a place where you can get this online without a doctor's, or the RBC magnesium test. It's not, and it's relatively inexpensive. I think it's under $100. So let's go on for some more. I think we already talked about the K2 in the culture.
There's an interesting one, Dr. Mercola. I want to know what to do about my severe dry skin on my face. I've tried virgin shea butter, organic virgin coconut olive oil, coconut oil, virgin coconut, everything, and Nordic fish oil. Nothing helps. Let me be Dr. Mercola for just one moment, and then jump in.
Sure.
That is that it really doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to try to treat dry skin externally. I mean, it can in the short term take away the flakiness, maybe reduce the itching. But the real problem here is that the oils in the skin have to be made from something, and they're made from the very fats that you describe. What we generally see in individuals who have these issues are two things. Number one, higher levels of inflammatory markers, and number two, higher levels of fecal fat. We do a lot of stool analysis. We send a lot of stool specimens to the laboratory, and one of the parameters that comes back has to do with the amount of fat in the stool, and actually breaks down the type of fat that people tend to be losing. So those two things are actually very closely connected, because as individuals have lost diversity of gut bacteria, they tend to lose their ability to break down and absorb fat, and this tends to increase inflammation as well. So we see these patients that come in, their skin is ruddy and scaly, and they have other inflammatory issues beyond the skin, like joint pain, for example, and even some cognitive issues which are inflammatory, and generally fatigue as well. So again, this gets back to eating right. It gets back to eating a high fiber diet that nurtures the good bacteria in the gut. Taking probiotic supplements is very helpful, but it seems a bit challenging for people to sometimes get their arms around the idea that we're going to fix your skin by paying attention to your gut. And Dr. Mercola and I were both trained in the notion that the body is made up of these separate parts that never communicate. The brain is here, the gut is someplace in Cleveland, and they're not going to communicate. We now understand the body functions in a very dare I say, holistic way, that everything contributes to the sum, and everything's constantly interacting with everything else. So this now, with this new mentality, which really is the mentality that physicians have been honoring until just the past century, really gives us a lot of new leverage to deal with things like skin. So you go to a dermatologist, you have dry, scaly skin, you're going to get a steroid cream or some lubricating cream. It comes from within.
Yes, indeed. I couldn't agree more. And you really want to pay attention to your fats. That's going to be the key, and especially the omega-3 fats. I think the animal-based good ones are good, but they're certainly complemented with the plant-based ones, the ALAs from hemp and flax and chia. So I can't find it now because these questions are moving around, but it was a good one. It was about let me see if I can find it on this sheet. FORTO. Oh, here it is. Craig, Z-list, 71-year-old female on bioidentical HRT since menopause, so about 20 years, maybe too low levels of estradiol, was on a walker, good nutrition, D3 last 3 or 4 years, high levels of calcium supplementation without any negative repercussions the last 30 years, repeated spinal compression fractures the last 2 years. What am I doing wrong? What are your opinions on Forteo? Forteo is a parathyroid hormone replacement, which is supposed to be helpful. So, but even the other ones would, what they didn't ask about is the biphosphonates, like Fosamax would be the classic one, and there's probably some newer ones that I'm forgetting about. But the key thing is you do not want to ever use biphosphonates like Fosamax. There's just no reason to ever use those. They are dangerous. You should be off of them immediately. That's just verboten, because they don't address the cause. This is a great example of addressing the cause. Now, if you have premature menopause, like before the age of 50, then you're probably going to get osteoporosis unless you address that hormone deficiency in some way. And that happens if you have your ovaries removed prematurely for whatever reason, and they're removed quite frequently, actually, for severe female conditions. So then you've got that issue to deal with. But the key thing is calcium typically is not the. I mean, you need vitamin D, but if you're having any dairy in your diet, like raw milk or cheeses, then you're probably going to get enough calcium. But magnesium is probably far more important, and zinc, and strontium, and a whole variety of other trace minerals which you need. But the other key thing is the vitamin K2. I think it's medically irresponsible and almost negligent malpractice not to recommend vitamin K2 in a comprehensive protocol to help someone restore their bone density. The challenge with a lot of the good supplements, though, not K2 supplements, but mineral supplements that have all these supplements, minerals in them, is that you might have to take 4 or 5 a day. And my mother is 80 years old, and she's got osteoporosis and has fractured her hips a few times and other bones. But she doesn't want to swallow a lot of pills, so I can't get her to take these supplements. I kind of twisted her arm to take the vitamin K2, but you've got to work with. Everyone gets a free choice on what they want to do. So if you don't want to take supplements, yeah, it's fine. But it's kind of, you need raw materials to build up bone. It just doesn't make it from thin air. You have to have the raw materials. So I don't think Forteo is probably a great idea without addressing the other components first. Maybe on top of that, it's probably expensive as can be, probably tens of thousands of dollars a year. Who knows? I have never prescribed it. It wasn't available when I was treating osteoporosis. So I'll let that over to you so you can address it.
Not much, but I would say that the notion that you've got to really load up on calcium and that's good for your bones because bones contain calcium, I think is, I don't want to say nonsense, but I think people tend to overdo it. You can take here's one. There's an antacid that's popularizing itself, saying it's a rich source of calcium as an antacid. Well, so people are popping this antacid pill because it's got calcium in it with the mistaken belief that they're doing their bones good. Well, you don't want to block stomach acid, first of all. Why would you want to block stomach acid, which activates your enzymes, which has a critical role in activating intrinsic factors so you don't become B12 deficient, etc. And the thing about Forteo is, I see patients who've come in on Forteo for a number of years, if you read the package insert on Forteo, it'll tell you that this product should not be used ever for more than 2 years in your entire lifetime. So just think, I'm simply saying, read the package insert. It says that in black and white, and keep that in mind. There's a reason that they said that. So something, after a couple years starts to manifest, you want to keep that in mind. And that's something, with the package insert that you can take to your doctor and say, gee, I noticed I've been on this medicine now for several years, but yet it tells me I shouldn't be on it. Pay attention to that kind of stuff.
But that reminds me, they said the exact same thing for H2 antagonists and then subsequently for proton pump inhibitors. And now they're over the counter and people can take them for their entire life.
I just wrote a blog about that really it's about 20 days that you're supposed to take these proton pump inhibitors, and yet you see the commercials on TV where a guy's trying to eat a sausage and the sausage turns away from his face, then he takes the acid blocking drug and he can eat all the crap that he wants. What we now understand, which is really very worrisome, and what my blog was about, is the notion that these proton pump inhibitors are having a significant damaging effect on the balance of gut bacteria. And no one is looking at the long-term consequences of that. And you're exactly right. I think it's 20 days that you're supposed to take those medicines, yet people pop them. I have patients on these drugs for years and years, and they never got the memo.
Yeah, well, let me follow up on that with one of the questions that Mike McMaster asked. And he said, I've been diagnosed with hiatal hernia many years ago. My symptoms were quite severe, and I took prescription drugs for 8 years. My doctor said I should stop. After a fairly rigorous fasting, cleansing diet, the symptoms disappeared for a few years and then began to return. I altered my diet to more balanced and more organic, and I still have recurring minor symptoms. Is there anything I can do to expect that to improve? So I think this is a great question because this is so pervasive. There are so many people taking these over-the-counter drugs. So the key thing is they in no way, shape, or form ever treat the cause. They only mask it and mask it in a way that will cause you to take them essentially the rest of your life because they're almost the ideal drug designed by the drug company because they treat the symptoms very effectively. They remove the pain, but they do it in a way that actually gets you dependent upon them because if you try to get off of them, they make the pain even worse than it was before you had it. So the worst are the proton pump inhibitors, like Prilosec, and those you have to get off of. You cannot be on those things. So you have to do it very gradually, reduce the dose, and you can consult with your doctor if you have one. But just get off of them, and then gradually, if you're not taking the H2 antagonists, which are less of a problem, like Zantac or Tagamet or cimetidine, then you can substitute those and gradually wean off of those. But then you've got to, at the same time, treat the cause because those drugs are not, as I said, they're not treating the cause. What is the cause? Usually the microbiome. What Dr. Perlmutter's new book is, Brain Maker, is all about, to optimize your gut flora. When I was a medical student, I read an article in 1980 by Barry Marshall, who was a family physician in Australia, who at the time he called the Campylobacter jejuni was the cause of ulcers. I told that to my gastrointestinal mentors, and they just laughed me out of stock. I got a D that quarter, because they didn't believe it. Yet 25 or 15 years later, Barry Marshall got the Nobel Prize, and they renamed it Helicobacter. But the answer is not taking antibiotics. It's restoring the normal gut flora, and you can do that by eliminating the sugars. As Mike, as you noticed, that's the key thing. You cannot improve the most important thing for improving your microbiome. Not taking a probiotic, not taking fermented vegetables. Those are great, but the most important thing is to stop taking your foot on the gas pedal by getting off the sugar and the processed foods and the grains and especially the glutens. So you got to get off of those things to help improve it. And then you could get the fermented vegetables and the probiotics, but those are really important things. And actually for hiatal hernia, Mike, there's a number of really effective chiropractors who use this very specific manipulation where they go in there and they adjust the hernia in some way that seems to work for many people. I've had a lot of good patients who seem to get relief from that. So those are my comments on it, and I'm sure, David, you have a few others.
Well, to add to that, I mean, what we know is that you can enhance gastric emptying by eating the dreaded fat. When you eat fat, you actually enhance the ability of the stomach to empty itself, as opposed to eating sugar and carbohydrates, which tends to lock up the pyloric valve and leads to the stomach becoming distended. Now, from a remedial perspective, we oftentimes use what's called DGL, deglycerated licorice, to chew a couple of tablets before a meal. It does tend to increase the mucin production and causes there to be better protection of those cells, and that does tend to reduce the symptoms. But you know, the other thing is that this is a very common problem with people that have big bellies. You know, the bigger your belly, the more pressure, especially when you're recumbent or lying on your back, the more pressure there is on your stomach, and the more likelihood you will have to develop a hiatal hernia. So as you readopt a healthy lifestyle and you lose weight and you're exercising more, a lot of times those issues tend to improve.
And I would be highly remiss if I chose not to answer Joe's question because he's a fellow Italian. Joe Consolini, he is very interested in Butanco breathing and has tried it with Peak 8, which is a form of high-intensity training that I advocate. However, I haven't been able to do it with CrossFit. Do you think it's even possible or beneficial with exercise this intense? I am looking for any competitive advantage. I think this might help. And also, I've seen the training masks that mimic high-altitude training. If so, how do these compare to Butanco breathing? Great question. Butanco breathing is a very powerful tool, and Patrick McGowan, I think is his last name. He's a Butanco instructor out in Ireland. Is close to publishing a book on this, and I've read the draft of it, and it's really good. So I think it's a powerful tool that is sort of an advanced technique, but it's really useful for almost everyone, and especially anyone out there has a problem with asthma. You would be highly remiss not to use this tool to treat asthma. Basically it's slow breathing to the point where you get this air hunger. And yes, it's difficult to do when you really do high intense exercise. It's hard to imagine CrossFit being more of an intense than Peak 8, but it's probably just a different form of high intensity because you're doing different movements. But you know, do it as best you can. It took me like 2 months before I was able to do Butanco breathing with a Peak 8. But you just have to, you know, maybe the second rep 3 reps, and then maybe you do 3.5, and then 4 reps, and then just take small breaths in with your you know, as minimal amount as you can. And then this high altitude training mask, I think that's great, but it's unnecessary. It's expensive and it's just unnecessary. You can get the same benefits with Butanco breathing. That's what it does. It simulates high altitude training, so that's what you need. And here's the other thing that I really didn't talk about in the book too much. It's a new update. Is that personally, about the last 4 to 5 months, I've been experimenting with meditation. In the past, I've always found it more than challenging to do because I'm so busy, I don't have the time to do it, and how do I know if I'm doing it the right way? Well, I found this new device that is actually a headband that you wear, and it has 5 or 6 sensors that actually can measure your brain waves and give you real-time feedback to know if you're meditating properly. And it's really been magnificent for me. So now I'm meditating 20-30 minutes a day, sometimes up to an hour, because one of the important components, I mean, it's really almost as beneficial as sleep, and maybe even more beneficial, but it's a powerful tool. And what I've learned in this, because I've had the real-time feedback, is that when I do Butanco type breathing, where I'm just really doing this slow, super slow breathing, then I'm able to get into the deepest levels of meditation. And they quantify it actually, what percent calm your brain is, and the highest you can get is 99%. I've actually achieved that a few times. But if, you know, most of us are like 20-30%, we're in these alpha rhythms all the time. So it's, you know, but it's really helpful. I don't think anyone would disagree who's ever studied this, that meditation is a profoundly powerful tool to improve your overall health. I kind of look at it as an advanced thing because most of us have so many other issues that we could address first. But if you've done these, or if you have anxiety or stress, I mean, you just got to look at meditation. I think some of these other adjunctive tools that are coming out now that really, for a few $100s, provide, you know, that are really compact. They work with your smartphone, and they're basically would have cost $10,000 5 years ago, and have been a size of equipment that fit in the closet. So technology is really helping us out here.
I'm good. Next question.
Okay. Let's see. Let's do a few more, and then we could call it a night because I think people are probably getting tired. Why don't you? I think I hit most of the main ones I wanted to. So.
Well, let me ask you a question if I can.
Sure. Yeah, you can ask a question.
I want to
Absolutely.
ask a question, Dr. Mercola.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, there was a great discussion about walking barefoot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, it'd be good to tell the viewers this evening why you think that's important.
Well, let me first admit, first of all, that I live in Florida, so I'm able to walk barefoot almost every day that I'm not traveling, and I do. I walk barefoot today for an hour and a half, and I do that, time it so that I'm, I've got a lot of things on my plate, so I do it so I'm really efficient. I do it at solar noon, and I wear just a pair of shorts and no shirt, and the majority of my skin is exposed, except for I wear a cap to, because you don't need, if you should wear protection for your face, because you don't need sun exposure on your face. You've got, your chest and your back and your legs are far better, and arms. So, and I'm walking barefoot on the ocean, where the water laps up to the sand, because the reason I do that is because not only do you get the negative ions from the ocean, but you also get this passive transfer of electrons, which are really pretty potent antioxidant, not as effective, I think, as hydrogen gas, but highly complementary, that basically helps squelch some of the oxidative stresses. So, and really, it goes back to this whole issue of replicating ancestral patterns, which I think if we can do, once the closer we get to duplicating what our ancestors did, the more likely we're going to be able to synergize with our biochemistry and genetics to optimize our longevity and decrease our risk for degenerative diseases. So it's a powerful thing. And the other thing I do is I'm walking barefoot on the sand, absorbing my ultraviolet radiation and infrared from the sun, is that I'm actually reading on my Kindle. So I'm able to read a book a week now, which I'd never been able to do. I was one of my biggest frustrations in life was never to have enough time to read. But then I realized even if I was reading, I'd be sitting down and mucking up my back. So now I can read and walk, and it's like a marriage made in heaven. I'm just really excited to be able to do those things. So I'm able to get the sun, the grounding, the negative ions, and the reading. And it works out really well. And walking, because I think walking is an important tool. We all need movement. I try to get, I think 7,000 steps a day is good for most people. I get about double that, usually 15, 16,000 steps, which is about 8 miles a day or so. And but it's simple walking. It's not running. It's very easy on your body, and it's what your body needs. You give your body what it needs, it's going to give you a lot of benefits back.
Well, great. Well, I'd like to just say in closing that I sure do appreciate all that you do. I mean, you work tirelessly. Your information, your content base is so in-depth. And, at the end of the day, Dr. Mercola speaks from the heart, but also from his review of current science. This stuff is substantiated what he says, and it's really, spreading a very, very important message, a message really of empowerment. The choices are ultimately yours, and we as individuals, our task is to get as much information as we can and then make the decisions about the foods that we eat, the drugs that we do or do not take, and other aspects of our lifestyle that are really very important. So, I just want to go on record as being very grateful for all the work that you do.
Well, and I'm grateful for your support too, and all the help that you've provided me, and continue to provide all the others through the books and the information that you are. You're really